They say in the underworld, you're only as good as your word. But in the Lucchese Crime Family during the late 1980s, you were only as good as the space you occupied in Anthony Casso's ledger. Anthony Salvatore Casso, known to the streets as Gaspipe, didn't just run a criminal empire. He ran a slaughterhouse. He was a man who didn't believe in second chances, and he certainly didn't believe in mercy. By the time the FBI caught up with him, Casso had a list, a physical ledger. In it were 37 names, 37 human beings marked for permanent removal from the face of the earth. One by one, those names were crossed out in red ink. It was a mathematical certainty. If your name was in the book, you were already a ghost. The world just hadn't realized it yet. But on a freezing night in 1992, moments before the walls of justice finally closed in, Casso did something that defied every logic of the Mafia code. He reached for that ledger, and he erased the only name that could have saved him. Why? Because in the world of the Mafia Vault, love is a liability, and secrets are the only currency that matters. Tonight, we open the file on the most homicidal man in Mafia history. This is the rise, the paranoia, and the absolute destruction of Anthony Gaspipe Casso. To understand the monster, you have to understand the cage he was raised in. Brooklyn in the 1940s wasn't the hipster paradise it is today. It was a battlefield of ethnic enclaves, where the only way to protect your family was to be more feared than your neighbor. Anthony was born in 1942 in South Brooklyn. His father, Michael Casso, was a soldier's soldier. He wasn't a boss, but he was a man people moved aside for. Michael had a reputation for settling disputes not with words, but with a literal piece of gas pipe he kept tucked into his belt. This is where Anthony's nickname was born. To the world, he was Anthony. To the mob, he was Gaspipe, a tribute to the brutal legacy of his father. Young Anthony didn't want to be a laborer. He watched the made men in the social clubs, men who wore silk suits while the rest of the world wore rags. He started as a protege of Christopher "Christy Tick" Furnari, a high-ranking member of the Lucchese family. By the 1970s, Casso had become a super earner. He had a genius-level IQ for logistics. He didn't just hijack trucks, he hijacked entire industries. From the docks of New York to the construction sites of Manhattan, if a dollar moved, Gaspipe took a dime. But unlike other earners who stayed away from the dirty work, Casso loved the violence. He once said that killing was like breathing. It was just something you had to do to stay alive. Every mafia boss fears the police. They fear the wiretaps, the surveillance vans, and the undercover agents. But Anthony Casso had a secret weapon that made him the most dangerous man in America. He didn't hide from the police. He owned them. This is the chapter of the story that still haunts the NYPD to this day. Casso managed to recruit two decorated detectives, Louis Eppolito and Stephen Caracappa. In the underworld, they were known as the Mafia Cops. For a monthly retainer of $4,000, these men turned the New York Police Department into a private intelligence agency for the Lucchese family. Imagine the power. Every time the FBI opened a new investigation, Casso knew within hours. Every time a member of the family sat down with a federal agent, Eppolito and Caracappa pulled the files. Casso called them his crystal ball. They did more than just provide information. They became his most efficient hitmen. On one occasion, Casso wanted a man named James Heidel dead. The Mafia cops didn't just find him. They used their badges to pull him over, kidnapped him, and delivered him in the trunk of their car directly to Casso. Gaspipe spent hours torturing Heidel before ending his life. It was a level of corruption never seen before. The line between the law and the lawless had completely vanished. In 1985, the Mafia world was rocked by the unsanctioned murder of Paul Castellano, the boss of the Gambino family. The man who ordered the hit, John Gotti. To the public, Gotti was a hero, the Teflon Don. But to Anthony Casso, Gotti was a loud-mouthed rule breaker who had disrespected the commission. Casso, along with Genovese's boss Vincent, the Chin Gigant, decided that Gotti had to die. In April 1986, Casso orchestrated one of the most famous hits in history. A remote-controlled bomb was planted under a car outside a Brooklyn social club. The target was Gotti. But as the smoke cleared, it wasn't Gotti who lay dead in the street. It was his underboss, Frank DeSicco. Gotti had arrived late. This failed hit sparked a silent, decade-long war. Casso spent millions trying to find a way to get to Gotti, but the Teflon Don was too well protected. The tension turned New York into a powder keg. Every night, mobsters slept with one eye open, knowing that Gaspipe was out there, somewhere in the shadows, waiting for his moment. By the early 1990s, the power was going to Casso's head. He had moved into the role of underboss, but he was the true power behind the throne. However, a man with as many enemies cannot live in peace. Paranoia began to rot his mind. He started to believe that everyone, even his most loyal capos, was a potential rat. He began using his crystal ball to check everyone's background. If he even suspected a man was looking at him the wrong way, that man's name went into the ledger. This was Casso's fatal mistake. By killing his own men to prevent them from talking, he actually forced them to talk. Men who had been loyal for 20 years realized that their only hope for survival was to run to the FBI before Casso got to them first. The Lucchese family was eating itself alive. Casso fled to a secret hideout in New Jersey, running his empire through payphones and coded messages. He was a king in a bunker, ruling over a kingdom of ghosts. In 1993, the unthinkable happened. Anthony Casso, the man who had ordered the deaths of dozens of rats, the man who preached the code of Omerta louder than anyone, was captured by the FBI. Facing a life sentence and the possibility of the death penalty, the monster folded. Casso agreed to become a government witness. He sat in a room with federal agents for months, detailing every murder, every bribe, and every secret burial site. He gave up the mafia cops. He gave up the commission. But even as a witness, Casso couldn't stop being a criminal. He was caught bribing guards, attacking other inmates, and lying to prosecutors. In an unprecedented move, the U.S. government did something they had never done before. They kicked a high-level mafia boss out of the witness protection program. They told him, "You're too evil even for us." Anthony Gaspipe Casso was sentenced to 13 consecutive life terms. He spent the rest of his days in a supermax prison, the very thing he spent his whole life trying to avoid. He died in 2020, a victim of the COVID-19 pandemic, gasping for air in a cold prison hospital. In the end, the ledger of 37 names didn't protect Anthony Casso. It condemned him. He was a man who thought he could control the world with a gas pipe and a pen, but he died with nothing. The Mafia Vault isn't just about the crimes, it's about the cost. Every empire built on blood eventually collapses under its own weight. Anthony Casso wasn't a hero, and he wasn't a legend. He was a cautionary tale written in red ink. The vault is never truly closed. Next week, we look at the man who was so dangerous, even the mafia was afraid to kill him. Subscribe and don't miss the next investigation.